What if I told you that a single man, working in a tiny workshop in Utah, created weapons so revolutionary that they're still being used over 100 years later on battlefields around the world? A man who never attended formal engineering school, who learned everything from his father in a gunsmith shop, and who would go on to design over 128 different firearms. A man whose inventions would be carried by soldiers in World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and even in conflicts happening right now. His name was John Moses Browning. And this is the story of how a Mormon gunsmith from the American frontier became the most prolific firearms designer in human history. Picture this. Ogden, Utah, 1855. The American West is still wild. Mormon pioneers are carving out a life in the unforgiving desert. And in a modest workshop filled with the smell of gun oil and metal shavings, a boy named John Moses Browning is born. His father, Jonathan Browning, is already a respected gunsmith, known throughout the territory for his reliable weapons and innovative designs. But Jonathan has no idea that his son will eclipse his legacy in ways he could never imagine. From the moment John could walk, he was in that workshop. While other children played with wooden toys, young John was handling rifle parts, learning the feel of cold steel, understanding the geometry of barrels and triggers. By age 7, he was already assisting his father with repairs. By age 10, he was making components from scratch. The workshop wasn't just his playground. It was his school, his church, his entire world. But here's the thing that made John different. He didn't just learn how guns worked. He became obsessed with why they worked the way they did, and more importantly, how they could work better. Every gun that came through his father's shop was a puzzle to be solved, an opportunity to imagine something more efficient, more reliable, more powerful. At age 13, John made his first complete firearm from scrap materials he found around the shop. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. His father was impressed, but John wasn't satisfied. He could already see the flaws, the improvements he would make next time. This restless drive for perfection would define his entire career. In 1879, at just 24 years old, John Browning received his first patent. It was for a single-shot rifle with a falling block mechanism. Now, to understand why this was revolutionary, you need to know that most rifles at the time were clunky, prone to jamming, and difficult to manufacture. Browning's design was elegant, simple, and could be produced quickly and cheaply. But here's where the story gets interesting. A representative from Winchester Repeating Arms Company happened to see one of Browning's rifles. Winchester, at that time, was the biggest name in American firearms, the company that quite literally won the West. And they were stunned. This kid from Utah, working in a tiny workshop, had designed something that their entire engineering department couldn't match. In 1883, Winchester bought the rights to Browning's single-shot rifle for $8,000. That's about $250,000 in today's money. But more importantly, they offered him something even more valuable, a partnership. Winchester would manufacture his designs, and Browning would receive royalties and the freedom to keep inventing. For the next 19 years, John Browning and Winchester were unstoppable. He designed the Winchester Model 1885, the Model 1886, the Model 1892, the Model 1894, and the legendary Model 1897 pump-action shotgun. Each one was more innovative than the last. Each one sold in massive quantities. Browning was becoming wealthy, but more than that, he was building a reputation as the man who could solve any firearms problem. But Browning's mind was always racing ahead. By the 1890s, he was working on something completely different, something that would change warfare forever. He became fascinated with the idea of a self-loading firearm. Every gun in existence required the shooter to manually reload after each shot. What if the gun could use the energy from firing to automatically eject the spent cartridge and load a new one? It sounds simple now, but at the time it was considered nearly impossible. The forces involved in firing a gun are enormous. The heat, the pressure, the violent recoil, all of these had to be controlled and channeled precisely. Most experts thought it couldn't be done reliably. Browning proved them wrong. In 1898, he completed his design for the world's first successful semi-automatic shotgun. He called it the Automatic 5, or Auto 5. This wasn't just an improvement. It was a complete revolution. A hunter could fire 5 shots as fast as he could pull the trigger. No pumping, no manual reloading. Just aim and shoot. He was so excited that he immediately took it to Winchester, expecting them to be as thrilled as he was. But Winchester's president, T.G. Bennett, looked at the design and hesitated. He wasn't sure the American market was ready for such a radical change. And here's where the relationship broke down. Bennett wanted to buy the design outright for a flat fee, rather than pay royalties as they had done before. Browning refused. He knew this design was special. He knew it would sell millions. After 19 years of successful partnership, John Browning walked out of Winchester's offices for the last time. Now here's where most inventors would have panicked. Browning had just severed ties with the biggest firearms manufacturer in America. He had a revolutionary design, but no one to produce it. What did he do? He boarded a ship to Belgium. In the small Belgian town of Herstal, there was a relatively new company called Fabrique Nationale, or FN for short. They had the manufacturing capability but needed innovative designs to compete in the global market. When Browning showed them the Auto 5, they immediately recognized its potential. They didn't just buy the design, they created a partnership that would last for decades and produce some of the most iconic firearms in history. The Auto 5 went into production in 1902. It became an instant sensation. Hunters loved it. Sport shooters loved it. It was reliable, powerful, and unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The Auto 5 would remain in production for an astounding 98 years, making it one of the longest-produced firearms ever. Nearly 3 million were sold. Winchester, the company that had passed on the design, could only watch as their former partner created a worldwide phenomenon with their competitor. But Browning wasn't done. Not even close. Because while the Auto 5 was changing hunting forever, dark clouds were gathering over Europe. And Browning's next invention would be designed not for the hunting fields, but for the battlefield. The early 1900s saw the rise of the machine gun. These weapons could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, creating devastating defensive positions. But there was a problem. They were enormous, heavy, and required multiple soldiers to operate. What the military desperately needed was a weapon that combined the firepower of a machine gun with the portability of a rifle. They needed a weapon that one soldier could carry and use effectively in an assault. Military leaders from around the world challenged weapons designers to solve this problem. It seemed impossible. Machine guns were heavy because they needed robust mechanisms to handle sustained fire. They needed water cooling to prevent overheating. They needed massive ammunition feeds. How could all of that be shrunk down to something one man could carry? John Browning heard about this challenge, and his mind immediately started working. He understood something that other designers didn't. You didn't need to make a smaller machine gun. You needed to make a larger rifle. A rifle that could fire automatically, but in controlled bursts. A rifle that could lay down suppressive fire, but still be aimed accurately. In his workshop, Browning began experimenting with gas-operated systems. He realized that some of the expanding gases from a fired cartridge could be diverted to power a mechanism that would automatically eject and reload. He worked on the design for months, testing different configurations, different barrel lengths, different gas systems. By 1917, Browning had created something extraordinary: the Browning automatic rifle, known forever after as the Bar. It weighed just 16 pounds loaded, fired the powerful .30-06 rifle cartridge, and could switch between semi-automatic and fully automatic fire. It could be fired from the shoulder, from the hip, or mounted on a bipod. It was exactly what the military had been looking for. But here's the remarkable part. World War I was already raging in Europe. American forces were about to join the conflict. The military was desperate for any advantage they could get. Browning demonstrated the bar to military officials in February 1917. They were stunned. They ordered it into production immediately. Now think about how incredible this timeline is. From initial design to military adoption in about a year. In that same period, Browning also finalized his design for the M1917 water-cooled machine gun and began work on what would become the M1919 machine gun. One man, in one workshop, was designing multiple weapons systems that would define 20th century warfare. The bar saw limited action in World War I, arriving just in time for the final offensives of 1918, but the soldiers who used it gave glowing reports. It was reliable under terrible conditions. It gave infantry squads massive firepower, and it could keep up with advancing troops in a way that traditional machine guns couldn't. But the BR's true test would come in the next global conflict. By World War II, the bar had become standard issue for American infantry units. Every squad had one, carried by the automatic rifleman. This was typically the strongest soldier in the unit, because the bar and its ammunition were heavy. But that weight brought incredible capability. The bar gave infantry squads the ability to suppress enemy positions while other soldiers maneuvered. It could put down sustained fire to keep enemy heads down. It could be brought to bear quickly when a squad encountered unexpected resistance. Veterans of the war consistently rated the bar as one of the most important weapons they had. In the Pacific Theater, where fighting often happened at close quarters in dense jungle, the bar's ability to deliver massive firepower quickly made the difference between life and death. In Europe, where infantry had to assault fortified positions, the bar provided covering fire that allowed advances that would have been suicidal otherwise. Stories from the battlefield tell of bar gunners becoming legends in their units. There's the account of Private First Class Tony Steen at Iwo Jima, who removed a bar from a wrecked Navy fighter plane, modified it, and used it to nearly single-handedly clear Japanese pillboxes. He made multiple trips back to the beach to get more ammunition, bringing back wounded soldiers each time. He was awarded the Medal of Honor. There's the story of soldiers in the Battle of the Bulge, who held impossible positions because their bar kept German infantry at bay. There are countless accounts from Normandy to Okinawa of bar gunners saving their squads. But here's the most impressive testament to the bar. German and Japanese soldiers actively sought to capture them. They were considered better than many of their own squad weapons. Finding a bar on the battlefield was a prize. While the bar was transforming infantry combat, another Browning design was proving equally revolutionary: the M1911 pistol. This weapon deserves its own spotlight in our story because it represents everything brilliant about Browning's design philosophy. In the early 1900s, the U.S. military was using .38 caliber revolvers. But during the Philippine-American War, soldiers found that these simply didn't have enough stopping power against determined enemies. The military needed something more powerful, and they wanted a semi-automatic pistol that could be fired quickly without manual cocking. Browning had been working on semi-automatic pistol designs for years. By 1905, he had developed a pistol in .45 caliber that used his revolutionary recoil-operated design. The slide moved backward when fired, ejecting the spent cartridge and loading a new one from the magazine. It was elegant, reliable, and powerful. The military was skeptical. Semi-automatic pistols had a reputation for being unreliable, so they put Browning's design through brutal tests. They fired 6,000 rounds through a single pistol without cleaning it. They dunked it in mud and sand. They exposed it to extreme heat and cold. The pistol kept working. In 1911, the U.S. military officially adopted it as the M1911. It would remain the standard U.S. military sidearm for 74 years, serving in every American conflict from World War I through the invasion of Grenada. Even after the military officially replaced it, many Special Forces units continued to use it because they trusted it more than newer designs. Why did it last so long? Because Browning had achieved something remarkable. He had created a design so fundamentally sound that it couldn't really be improved upon. Modern pistols use different materials and have different features, but many still use the basic operating principles Browning developed for the 1911. Over 100 years after its introduction, the 1911 remains one of the most popular pistol designs in the world. It's used by competitive shooters, law enforcement, military units, and civilian gun owners. Dozens of manufacturers produce their own versions. The design that the military tested in 1911 is still proving itself on shooting ranges today. But perhaps the most enduring of all Browning's military designs is the one he created. Near the end of World War I, the M2 50 caliber machine gun, affectionately known as Madus, or the 50. As World War I progressed, it became clear that something was needed to defeat increasingly armored targets. Armored cars, early tanks, and fortified positions required a weapon more powerful than standard machine guns. The military wanted something that could fire a massive 50 caliber projectile with enough force to penetrate armor, but in a package that could actually be moved and used in combat. In 1918, General John Pershing specifically requested such a weapon. Browning, working with Winchester repeating arms and the help of engineer Fred T. Moore, scaled up his existing machine gun designs to handle the enormous 50 caliber BMG cartridge. The result was the M1921, which would evolve into the M2. The M2 fired a bullet half an inch in diameter. Each round weighed about 4 ounces. The gun could penetrate light armor at substantial ranges. It could be used against aircraft, vehicles, or fortifications. It could fire around 500 rounds per minute, and it was reliable under conditions that would destroy lesser weapons. But here's what makes the M2 truly legendary. It's still in service today. That's right. A weapon designed in 1918 is still being used by the U.S. military and dozens of other militaries worldwide. It saw service in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, and every conflict in between. It's been mounted on ships, aircraft, vehicles, and tripods. It's been used as an anti-aircraft gun, an anti-personnel weapon, and an anti-vehicle weapon. Modern militaries have tried repeatedly to replace the M2. They've developed newer designs with lighter materials, better ergonomics, and more advanced features. None of them have proven better enough to justify replacing a design that works so reliably. The M2 has been in continuous production for over a century. That's not just impressive, that's unprecedented. Think about that for a moment. John Browning, working with early 20th century tools and materials, created a weapon design so fundamentally excellent that 21st century engineers with computers and advanced materials science still can't significantly improve upon it. While the the 1911, and the M2 are Browning's most famous military weapons, they're far from his only contributions to warfare. The M1917 water-cooled machine gun was the standard American machine gun of World War I. The M1919 air-cooled machine gun served from 1919 through the Vietnam War. The M1918 was used extensively in World War II, but Browning also revolutionized other types of firearms. He designed the Winchester Model 1894 lever-action rifle, which became the best-selling sporting rifle of all time, with over 7.5 million produced. He created the Colt Woodsman pistol, the FN Model 1910 pistol, and the Browning high-power pistol, which became one of the most widely used military pistols in the world. He developed the Browning Superposed, the first successful over and under shotgun, which changed the sport of clay target shooting forever. His Auto 5 shotgun design was so successful that it was produced continuously from 1902 until 1998, the longest production run of any shotgun in history. By conservative estimates, John Moses Browning received 128 patents for firearms designs, but the actual number of guns he worked on was likely much higher because many of his early designs were never patented. He created everything from tiny .22 caliber pistols to massive artillery pieces. He worked on designs for rifles, pistols, shotguns, and machine guns. He developed designs for military use, police use, sporting use, and self-defense. So, how did he do it? What made John Moses Browning so incredibly prolific? Why was this Mormon gunsmith from Utah able to accomplish more than entire engineering departments at major corporations? First, Browning had an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that was almost superhuman. He could visualize how forces would act on components, how metal would flex and wear, how gases would flow and pressure would build. This wasn't just theoretical knowledge. It came from thousands of hours in the workshop, handling parts, feeling how metal responded to different forces. Second, Browning was a ruthless problem solver. When he encountered an issue, he didn't try to work around it. He redesigned from first principles until the problem didn't exist. This is why his designs often look deceptively simple. He had eliminated everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Third, Browning tested obsessively. He would fire thousands of rounds through prototypes, deliberately trying to make them fail. He would expose them to mud, water, sand, and extreme temperatures. He wanted to find every possible failure mode before a design went into production. This is why his firearms had such extraordinary reliability. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, Browning never stopped learning. Even after he had become wealthy and famous, he continued to work in his shop every day, experimenting with new mechanisms, testing new ideas. He treated each design not as a finished product, but as a step toward the next improvement. His workshop became legendary. He would work alone, often for months at a time, emerging only when he had something new to show. He worked primarily from mental visualization and rough sketches, building prototypes directly rather than creating detailed plans. This drove patent attorneys crazy, but it allowed Browning to iterate designs quickly. Stories from his workers tell of a man who was completely absorbed in his work. He would sometimes forget to eat or sleep when working on a particularly interesting problem. He was known to wake up in the middle of the night, race to the workshop, and work until dawn on an idea that had come to him in a dream. Browning's relationship with Fabrique Nationale in Belgium deserves special attention because it represented a new model for firearms development. Before Browning, gun designers typically worked directly for manufacturing companies. They were employees, and their designs were owned by their employers. Browning pioneered a different approach. He remained independent, licensing his designs to manufacturers. This gave him creative freedom and financial rewards that few inventors of his era enjoyed. But it also meant he needed manufacturing partners he could trust. His relationship with F.N. Herstal was extraordinary. After Winchester passed on the Auto 5, Browning traveled to Belgium and met with F.N.'s directors. They immediately recognized not just the value of the Auto 5, but the potential of a long-term relationship with this brilliant inventor. F.N. gave Browning something few inventors ever receive: complete trust. They manufactured his designs exactly as he specified, even when their own engineers were skeptical. They gave him access to their facilities and workers. They paid him fair royalties, and in return, Browning gave them first access to his most innovative designs. This partnership produced the Auto 5, the high-power pistol, the FN Model 1910, and numerous other successful firearms. FN became one of the world's premier firearms manufacturers, largely on the strength of Browning's designs. Even today, more than a century after their partnership began, FN continues to produce firearms based on Browning's principles. But the relationship was more than just business. Browning spent extended periods in Belgium, working alongside FN's engineers. He shared his knowledge freely, teaching them his methods and principles. Many of the techniques he developed are still used in firearms design today. On a cold autumn day in 1926, John Moses Browning was in his workshop at FN in Herstal, Belgium. He was 71 years old but showed no signs of slowing down. He was working on a new design for a 9mm semi-automatic pistol that would become the legendary Browning High Power. In the middle of his work, he suddenly collapsed. He died of heart failure at his workbench, surrounded by the tools and parts that had defined his life. He died the way he had lived, creating firearms. The news of his death was headline news around the world. Military leaders, hunters, sport shooters, and firearms manufacturers all mourned the loss of a true genius. FN gave him a funeral with full honors. His body was returned to Utah, where he was buried in Ogden, the town where his incredible journey had begun. But his work wasn't finished. The pistol he was working on when he died, the High Power, was completed by Dieudonné Saive, one of FN's chief designers, based on Browning's notes and prototypes. It went into production in 1935 and became one of the most widely used military pistols in history, serving with over 50 countries and remaining in production for over 80 years. Today, more than a century after most of his designs were created, John Moses Browning's firearms are still in use around the world. The M2 machine gun he designed in 1918 is still the standard heavy machine gun for the U.S. military. The 1911 pistol remains one of the most popular handgun designs ever created. The Auto 5 shotgun design influenced virtually every semi-automatic shotgun that came after it. But Browning's legacy extends far beyond the specific firearms he designed. He established principles and mechanisms that form the foundation of modern firearms design. The recoil-operated system used in countless pistols today? Browning invented it. The gas-operated system used in most modern rifles? Browning perfected it. The tilting barrel design used to lock pistol slides? Browning developed it. Modern firearms designers still study Browning's work. Engineering students in military academies around the world analyze his designs to understand the principles of elegant mechanical design. His firearms are in museums, but they're also in active combat zones. They're collectibles worth thousands of dollars, but they're also working tools used by millions of people every day. There's a reason why Browning's designs have endured, while thousands of other firearms designs have been forgotten. He wasn't just creating guns. He was solving fundamental problems in ways that couldn't be improved upon. He was working at a level of mechanical brilliance that few people in any field ever achieve. But who was John Moses Browning as a person? The historical record gives us some clues. He was by all accounts a modest man who shunned publicity. Despite his wealth and fame, he continued to live simply and work constantly. He was a devoted Mormon who didn't drink or smoke, unusual for a gunsmith of his era. He married Rachel Teresa Child in 1879, and they had 10 children together. Despite his obsessive work habits, he was reportedly a devoted father who made time for his family. Several of his sons followed him into firearms design, particularly Val Browning, who would continue his father's work after his death. People who knew him described a man of few words who preferred to let his work speak for itself. He didn't engage in self-promotion or marketing. He didn't give speeches or seek awards. He simply created, constantly and brilliantly, for over 50 years. There's something almost monastic about his dedication to his craft. In an age of increasingly specialized knowledge, Browning represented an older tradition. The master craftsman who knew his materials intimately, who could envision a design completely in his mind, and who could turn that vision into reality with his own hands. So let's return to where we started. The idea of a hunting gun transformed into a frontline icon. While the bar was designed from the beginning as a military weapon, it represents the culmination of everything Browning learned from designing sporting firearms. The reliability came from his experience with hunting rifles that had to work in terrible weather. The ease of use came from his understanding that soldiers, like hunters, needed weapons that were intuitive. The firepower came from his recognition that the same principles that made a shotgun deadly to birds make a rifle deadly to enemies. The bar was revolutionary because it brought together sporting gun handling with military firepower. It was portable like a hunting rifle but delivered suppressive fire like a machine gun. It was accurate enough for aimed shots, but capable of automatic fire when needed. It was the perfect synthesis of everything Browning had learned in 4 decades of firearms design. And that synthesis created a weapon that fundamentally changed infantry tactics. Before the bar, infantry squads were equipped with bolt-action rifles that could fire perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute. Support by fire meant bringing up heavy machine guns that took minutes to set up. The bar gave every squad the ability to lay down suppressive fire instantly, allowing fire and movement tactics that had been impossible before. This is why the bar is still revered by military historians and veterans. It wasn't just a good weapon. It was a transformative weapon that gave infantry capabilities they had never had before. And it came from the mind of a man who started by making hunting rifles in a small workshop in Utah. John Moses Browning died almost a century ago, but his presence is still felt every single day. Right now, somewhere in the world, a soldier is firing an M2 machine gun that uses the same basic design Browning created in 1918. AEE sport shooter is competing with a 1911 pistol that uses mechanisms Browning invented in 1905. ATDER hunter is carrying a shotgun based on principles Browning established with the Auto 5 in 1902. His designs have been used in every major conflict since World War I. They've been manufactured by dozens of companies in countries around the world. They've been used by military forces, law enforcement agencies, and civilian shooters on every continent. Conservative estimates suggest that over 50 million firearms based directly on Browning designs have been manufactured. But beyond the numbers, beyond the historical impact, John Moses Browning represents something important: the power of dedicated craftsmanship. He wasn't educated at elite universities. He didn't have access to advanced computer modeling or materials science. He had a workshop, traditional tools, and an almost supernatural ability to understand how mechanical systems worked. In our age of artificial intelligence and algorithmic design, there's something inspiring about a man who could hold a piece of metal, feel its weight and balance, and envision how it could be shaped into something revolutionary. He reminds us that genius doesn't require fancy credentials or expensive equipment. It requires dedication, insight, and the willingness to work relentlessly toward perfection. They called him the Mad Mechanic, and maybe there was some madness in his single-minded devotion to firearms design. But that madness gave the world weapons that have defended freedom, fed families, and pushed the boundaries of mechanical design. That madness created a legacy that will endure for generations to come. John Moses Browning, born in a frontier workshop, died at his workbench and created more influential firearms designs than anyone before or since. A hunting gun designer who became a military legend. A Mormon gunsmith who armed the world. The mad mechanic who turned metal and gunpowder into history.